my name is Bradley Roth, and I'll be presenting a policy brief on the U.S.-China Joint Glasgow Declaration, among other global energy policies. So, before getting into policy, let's talk a little bit about the climate timeline internationally since about 1987. So, starting in 87, the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer is agreed upon, and in 1889 is later ratified and implemented. The Montreal Protocol was the first real international climate document that had strong international support and sets a groundwork for a lot of other documents going forward. In 1988, the United Nations launched the International Panel on Climate Change. The International Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, does a lot of things, and one of them being releasing a report on the climate, the impacts of man, and projections going forward about every 6 to 7 years. In 1992, the Rio Earth Summit set the grounds for the UNFCCC and the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. The UNFCCC, or the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, would be fully realized about 2 years later in 1994. The UNFCCC also brought into fruition the creation of the Conference of Parties. The first Conference of Parties being held in Bonn, Germany. The Conference of Parties are mainly known as COP, or COP. This was an excellent meeting platform for countries to get together and discuss climate change, as well as create treaties, protocols that cooperatively combat climate change. Continuing the international climate timeline, in 1997, during COP3 in Kyoto, Japan, the Kyoto Protocol was created. The Kyoto Protocol was the first strong international agreement to come out of the Conference of Parties. The Kyoto Protocol had a stipulation that would be enacted when it gave a strong enough majority of emission-producing nations. However, with nations like the United States and later Canada not signing into the agreement, it would take until 2005 for the Kyoto Protocol to be ratified. In 2012, during COP18 in Doha, Qatar, the second commitment period for the Kyoto Protocol was enacted and drafted. The Kyoto Protocol as an agreement was a messy document to begin with, and its second commitment period was no different. A lot of nations fell short of their climate goals. However, it sets a standard and framework for 2015 during COP21 in Paris, France, when the Paris Climate Agreement was drafted and enacted. COP21 was one of the most significant COPs in the history of the conference. The Paris Climate Agreement was a revolutionary document with the creation of Renewable Nationally Determined Contribution Documents, NDCs, as well as the creation of a climate finance fund. While the finance fund has routinely been underfunded, NDCs have proven to be a strong source of accountability for countries. In 2020, along with every 5 years following the original drafting of the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, includes a renewal of a country's nationally determined contribution, updating numbers, and setting stricter guidelines for themselves. This leads us to 2021 with COP26 in Glasgow, United Kingdom, our most recent COP, and a medial portrayed failure of a COP. However, many documents had come out of this, including the declaration through Japan and the United States. Now that we've looked at an international timeline, let's look at the U.S.-China energy timeline. Starting in 1979, ratification of the U.S.-China Agreement on Cooperation in Science and Technology was enacted. Most interactions following 1979 come out of this original agreement, as this was the beginning of strong U.S.-China science and tech relations. In 1998, the U.S.-China Peaceful Uses of Nuclear Technology Agreement of 1998 was ratified. Along with many other treaties between the two nations, this was the start of clean uses of nuclear technology as a form of energy, and continues to be useful to this day. In 1999, the U.S. Department of Energy and the Chinese Ministry of Science and Technology worked together to create a demonstration building for Agenda 21 Commission. The Agenda 21 Commission came out of Rio's Earth Day. In 2009, the U.S. Department of Energy and the Chinese Ministry of Science and Technology fund and create a $150 million clean energy research center. This research center was used by American and Chinese scientists and is still in use today. In 2010, the Memorandum of Understanding on Scientific and Technological Cooperation in the Field of the Environment was signed and enacted. In 2010, the inaugural U.S.-China Energy Efficacy Forum had its first forum. The U.S.-China Energy Efficacy Forum is one of many U.S.-Chinese efforts between scientists and businessmen of both countries to work together to create more energy-efficient technologies. Later in 2010, the first U.S.-China Renewable Energy Forum and Biofuels Forum was held in Beijing, China. Like I said before, this is another example of a push in 2010 between the two nations to work together towards clean energy and other forms of energy such as biofuels. In 2021, the U.S.-China Joint Glasgow Declaration on Enhancing Climate Change Action in the 2020s was drafted. During COP26 in Glasgow, United Kingdom, the United States and China drafted this declaration to reduce CO2 emissions through policies that increase energy efficiency to reduce electrical waste, deployment of direct air capture, and carbon storage, capture, and utilization, or CCUS. And finally, encourage integration of wind, solar, and other clean energy sources as well as their storage. On top of introducing policies that mitigate the production of and capture CO2, policies introduced to mitigate the production of methane were set by the open exchange of information on emissions, policies, and research into methane emission, creating pathways to enhance methane emission control, create a Chinese national action plan regarding methane, and continue talks regarding methane measurement and mitigation. Regarding global climate action, I would make the following recommendations of policy. To be a member of the Paris Climate Agreement and to make progress internally is not mutually exclusive. I would advise both of these actions. To continue independent efforts on a national scale to combat climate change, as well as the continuation of the United States' involvement in the Paris Climate Agreement. If future administrations have a less global vision of climate action take office, then there is a groundwork to continue climate action on a national level. You can have both. It is not a mutually exclusive thing. Another policy on a global scale that I would recommend is a continuation to utilize the Conference of Parties to create treaties between the United States and other nations. These can come in the form of American investment, information flow, and holding other nations accountable on a smaller scale. Investment in developing nations is an investment into a safer world going forward. And finally, working with France in the goal of establishing nuclear energy in nations that would benefit most from the energy source. Finding clean investment strategies in other nations for a cleaner world. Finally, my policy recommendations on the U.S.-China relations in regards to energy. Based on the current actions of the administration following the U.S.-China Joint Glasgow Declaration on Enhancing Climate Action in the 2020s, I would advise such pathways going forward, Mr. President. Looking into a combined action plan, similar to an NDC between the United States and China. China and the United States are by far the largest consumers of energy on a global scale. To work together towards a cleaner, more efficient future benefits both countries. For accountability between the two nations, existing tariffs could be used as chips. And finally, create new pathways to continue the flow of information between China and the United States. Information flow only benefits the two nations, as innovation is expected going forward. This can include providing expertise in the fields of thermal energy, as well as support, as both China and the United States look back towards nuclear energy as a reliable source of clean energy going forward. Thank you.